Welcome to another Precrustable Math Shorts. Remember, it's not magic, it's math. In this math short, we're going to be solving quadratic equations by factoring. And we're actually not going to be using the grouping method with this one. We're going to use what I like to call the easy method. In this video, I always like to start out by talking about the process. How are we going to solve quadratic equations by factoring? And then I'm going to show you some examples. And I always like to give students a self-quiz. A self-quiz is you're going to do the questions without looking back. The nice thing about that is when we work them together, you can see all of your mistakes, and that tells you where you're going to practice. Finally, you can't get good at it unless you practice, so I'm going to give you some video tasks. Let's get started with the process. The first thing you need to do to solve quadratic equations by factoring is it needs to be written in standard form. Now the standard form for this one is x squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Standard form really has an a in front of it, but since we're using the easy method, our leading coefficient will always be 1. Then we're going to factor it, rewrite the equation making each factor equal to 0, solve, and finally, we really want to check it to make sure we're right. Let's review that process. I have x squared plus 5x equals 14. Now the first thing we have to do is make sure that it's in standard form. Well, this one isn't, because standard form is always equal to 0. So that's why I have to subtract 14 from both sides. Now we're ready to factor. When I look at this one, I know that I have to think of two numbers that multiply to negative 14 that add to 5. For some of you, this may take some time, but I happen to know that 7 times negative 2 is negative 14, and 7 plus negative 2 is 5. And that right away gives us what I like to call our magic numbers. Our first magic number is 7, and all we're going to do is write x plus 7. Our second magic number is negative 2, so we write x minus 2. And you factored it. In step number 3, we need to rewrite the equations by making each factor equal to 0. And that's pretty easy. So for the first one, we'll just say x plus 7 equals 0, and we need to solve this. We're going to subtract 7 from both sides, and it turns out that x is negative 7. So that's possibly one of our solutions. We have to do it for x minus 2 also. So I have x minus 2 equals 0. I add 2 to both sides, and x equals 2. Now, yes, these are our solutions, but we always want to check because, sometimes you might have multiplied wrong or added wrong. It's really important to check. So how to check it? We just rewrite the original equation. So this first one, I'm just going to substitute negative 7 in for my x's. When I do that and I simplify, it turns out that 14 equals 14, and yeah, x equals negative 7 is a solution. Let's look at the second one. So once again, I'm going to put 2 in for all of my x's. And when I simplify, 14 equals 14. And oh my goodness, look at that. X equals 2 is also a solution to this equation. Let's look at the process one more time. I have x squared minus 9x plus 8 equals 0. The first step is to write the equation in standard form. Well, it's all ready for us because it equals 0. The next thing we need to do is we need to factor. So I'm looking for numbers that multiply to 8 that add to negative 9. Now once again, this may take some of you a little time, but I happen to know that negative 8 times negative 1 is 8. And negative 8 plus negative 1 is negative 9. So there we have it, our magic numbers. And we just rewrite x minus 8 and x minus 1. And we factored it. We need to rewrite the equations by making each factor equal to 0. So I have x minus 8 equals 0. I'm going to solve for x. So I add 8 to both sides, and it turns out that x equals 8. Cool. For our second one, we have x minus 1 equals 0. I add 1 to both sides, and it turns out that x equals 1. Well, that's great. And that's probably our answer, but we really need to check to make sure. So I just rewrite the original equation. In the first one, all I do is substitute 8 in for my x's. And when I solve, I end up with 0 equals 0. Wow, that's great. That means x equals 8 is a solution. But let's try the second one. Once again, I'm going to put my answer 1 in for all of the x's. When I simplify, look at that. 0 equals 0. So that tells me that x plus 1 is also a solution to this equation. Let's actually do some. For these three, we're going to solve the equations. Now, depending on your level of understanding, you might want to pause the video, complete these three, and then press play to check. If you're still not too sure, keep watching, because we're going to solve the first one together. X squared minus 2x equals 15. Now the first thing we have to do is make sure that it's in standard form. Well, this one isn't. So I need to subtract 15 from both sides. Now that gives me x squared minus 2x minus 15 equals 0. The next step is to factor. Well, for this one, I know I have to find two numbers that multiply to negative 15 that also add to negative 2. For this one, I happen to know that 3 times negative 5 is negative 15. And 3 plus negative 5 is negative 2. Now I want to just stop for a moment. If you did this on your own and you said negative 5 times 3 is negative 15, you're correct. And negative 5 plus 3 is negative 2, you're correct. And it's going to turn out that we have the same answers. But instead of your magic numbers giving you x plus 3 times x minus 5, you're going to have x minus 5 times x plus 3. But you know what? It doesn't matter. We're going to have the same answers. So now that we've factored it, we need to rewrite the equations by making each factor equal to 0. So we're going to say x plus 3 equals 0. I'm going to solve for x. So I subtract 3 from both sides. And my first solution is x equals negative 3. But remember, we always have to check. Let's look at the second one. X minus 5 equals 0. I'm going to add 5 to both sides. And x equals 5. Awesome. But let's check it. So for this first one, I'm going to substitute negative 3 in for my x's and simplify. As I simplify, it turns out that 15 equals 15. Cool. That means x equals negative 3. Great. But I have to check the other one too. So all I'm going to do is put 5 in for my variable, the x's. From here, we're going to simplify. And it turns out that 15 equals 15 again. So yep, x equals 5 is also a solution. So we just solved the equation. Let's look at the next one. So 0 equals x squared minus 13x minus 14. Now the first step is to make sure that it's in standard form. Now standard form means it equals 0. In this case, it's already equal to 0. Now listen, it doesn't matter if 0 equals the equation or the equation equals 0. But if you like to see it the other way, just flip it around. 0 equals x squared minus 13x minus 14 is exactly the same as x squared minus 13x minus 14 equals 0. From here, we need to factor it. That means I need to think of two numbers that multiply to negative 14 that add to negative 13. For this one, 1 times negative 14 is negative 14, and 1 plus negative 14 is negative 13. And right away, we have our magic numbers. So we're going to rewrite it as x plus 1 times x minus 14. Step number 3 asks us to rewrite the equation by making each factor equal to 0. All we need to do is write x plus 1 equals 0 and solve for x. We're going to subtract 1 from both sides, so we get x equals to negative 1. Let's do it for x minus 14. X minus 14 equals 0. I'm going to add 14 to both sides, so we get x equals to 14. Now chances are this is correct, but we always want to check. So to check it, I need to rewrite the original equation. For the first solution, all I do is put negative 1 in for the x's, and then simplify. And look at that, 0 equals 0. So that tells me that x equals negative 1 is a solution. Now I'm going to substitute 14 in for all of the x's. When I simplify, I end up with 0 equals 0. Wow, look at that. Our second solution is x equals 14. Let's look at the last one. If you haven't tried one by yourself yet, I suggest that you pause the video and try this one. Don't worry, I'm going to solve it right now. Step number 1, is it in standard form? And it is. Step number 2 is factor. So I have to think of two numbers that multiply to negative 65 that also adds to negative 8. This turns out to be 5 times negative 13, and 5 plus negative 13 is negative 8, and we found our magic numbers. All we're going to do is rewrite it as x plus 5 times x minus 13. Step number 3 is to rewrite the equations by making each factor equal to 0. So we're going to have x plus 5 equals 0. I subtract 5 from both sides, so x equals negative 5. For the second one, we have x minus 13 equals 0. I add 13 to both sides, so x equals 13. All right. Step number 5, checking. We rewrite the original equation. I'm going to substitute negative 5 in for all of the x's and simplify. When I do that, I end up with 0 equals 0. Yay! X equals negative 5. Let's look at the other one. So once again, I'm going to substitute 13 in for x. Let's simplify. Hey, look at that. 0 equals 0. So for this one, x equals 13 is also a solution. Great. Now that we have that under control, I want you to pause the video, complete the questions, and then press play to check your answers. The whole point of a self-quiz is to try not to look back at your notes. If you do have to look back at your notes, make sure to put a circle around that process. That's the piece you need to practice. So anyway, pause the video, and then when you're ready, press play to check. All right, let's see how you did. Step number 1 is rewrite the equation in standard form. Well, this one we have to do. So we're going to add 12 to both sides, and we end up with x squared minus 8x plus 12 equals 0. Next, factor. We have to think of two numbers that multiply to 12 that also add to negative 8. Negative 2 times negative 6 is 12. Negative 2 plus negative 6 is negative 8. And there we have our magic numbers. And now we have our two magic numbers. So all we have to do is write x minus 2 times x minus 6. Step number 3, rewrite the equations by making each factor equal to 0. So x minus 2 equals 0. I'm going to solve for x. So I add 2 to both sides, and x equals 2. I have x minus 6 also equals 0. I'm going to add 6, so x equals 6. Now, I'm pretty sure this is our answer, but we have to check to make sure. I rewrite the original equation. So I put 2 in for my x's just to make sure it works. And as I simplify, yep, negative 12 equals negative 12. So yes, x equals 2 is a solution. Let's try 6. So I put 6 in for my x's in the original equation. As I simplify, I see, negative 12 equals negative 12. And it turns out that x equals 6 is also a solution. So x equals 2 and x equals 6 are our two solutions for the first question. Let's look at the second question. X squared plus 5x plus 4 equals 0. Well, it's already in our standard form, so we're done with step number 1. Now we have to factor. That means we have to think of two numbers that multiply to 4 that also add to 5. Well, 4 times 1 is 4, and 4 plus 1 is 5. Yay! We found the magic numbers. So all we have to do is rewrite it as x plus 4 times x plus 1. On to step number 3. We're going to rewrite the equation by making each factor equal to 0. So I'm going to have x plus 4 equals 0. I subtract 4 from both sides, so I get x equals negative 4. I also need to put x plus 1 equals 0. I subtract 1 from both sides, so I get x equals negative 1. Now I'm pretty sure this is our answer, but we always want to check. I rewrite the original equation. For the first one, x equals negative 4, I'm going to put negative 4 in for both of my x's and simplify. It turns out that 0 equals 0, and yup, x equals negative 4 is one of my solutions. Let's do it for negative 1. So I'm going to substitute negative 1 in for all of my x's. And as I simplify, hey, 0 equals 0, so x equals negative 1, also a solution for this equation. Last but not least, x squared plus 27 equals negative 12x. Step number 1, it has to equal 0, okay? So for this one, I'm going to add 12x to both sides. This gives me x squared plus 12x plus 27 equals 0. Now if you happen to do this, and maybe you added 27 plus 12, well, we can't do that because they're not like terms. They both don't have an x. So, yeah, better circle that if you made that little mistake. We're going to keep going though. We're going to do step number 2, which is factor. So I have to think of two numbers that multiply to 27 that also add to 12. In this case, we have 9 times 3 is 27, and 9 plus 3 is 12. There's our magic numbers. So we're going to factor. We have x plus 9 times x plus 3. Step number 3 is to rewrite the equation by making each factor equal to 0. So x plus 9 equals 0. I subtract 9 from both sides. I get x equals 9. X plus 3 also equals 0. I subtract 3 from both sides, and x equals negative 3. Let's check it. I rewrite my original equation. Now I'm going to put negative 9 in for both of my x's and simplify. It turns out that 108 equals 108, and yes, x equals negative 9 is one of my solutions. Let's try x equals negative 3. Once again, I put negative 3 in for my x's, and as I simplify, I get 36 equals 36, and yes indeedy, x equals negative 3 is my second solution. Awesome! So what are your video tasks? Practice, practice, practice. There are links to free worksheets with solutions are in the description below. I also have a Teachers Pay Teachers worksheet that I created specifically for this video, so you want to check out that link too. If you liked it, like it. Yeah, like it. If you really liked it, why don't you subscribe? And did it help you? Well, share it too. Remember, it's not magic, it's math.